Hello everyone, my name is Korosh Erfani. I am a sociologist and the author of the book Infinitism. The book Infinitism is about a philosophical theory according to which we can get any material and production that we want, and as much as we want, as many as we want in the nature. So the idea is to find the infinite possibilities in the universe, and if we can go along with this idea, we can change our civilization, we can change our destiny. That's the idea of the infinitism, and for that we need the theoretical and practical tools, and the Infinitylogy try to elaborate and establish a methodology by which we can effectively get the knowledge of the infinity, and also the way that we can use the infinity in order to, change the nature of the different materials and get what we want. So, in order to have this methodology in the Infinitylogy, we are trying to see what could be the useful resources, what kind of methodology that we have to use. And that's why we are making a critical lecture of the different books, articles, and other sources in order to have some indicators, some direction to know what kind of methodology or what kind of methodological framework we have to elaborate for our discipline, new discipline that is Infinitylogy, right? And for that we started by the lecture of a book that is called Against Method, and this book had been written almost 40 years ago, we can say, by Paul Feyerabend. And Paul Feyerabend is an Austrian philosopher of science who suggested that in order to make the advancement and the progress in science, we should try to deconstruct the idea of using a single methodology as the scientific methodology, right? That's the idea of the Feyerabend, and that's why we are making a lecture of his book Against Method, and we hold back the interesting point, right? We retain the main ideas of this book in order to use that in the construction of our methodological framework for the Infinitylogy. So up to now we work on introduction and also on the chapter 1, and from this presentation we start to work on the chapter 2. So in the chapter 2 we have a summary. You can see that's the main idea of the chapter 2. He says, for example, we may use hypotheses that contradict well-confirmed theories and or well-established experimental results. We may advance science by proceeding counter-inductively. So, we want to know what are the details of this proposition, right? And that's why we go through the lecture of the text of the chapter 2. So, let's see. He says, examining the principle in concrete detail means tracing the consequences of counter rules, which oppose familiar rules of the scientific enterprise. So the basic idea is to understand the difference between rules and the counter rules. The rules are the evidence, what we consider as obvious, and we are applying it in the reproduction of the science. I said reproduction because based on the idea of the Feyerabend, as long as we don't break down the rules, we don't contradict them, we cannot produce something new. So in order to create something new, different, without precedent, we have effectively to use not only the rules but also the counter rules, and that could be an interesting point for believing in the fact that any innovation in the scientific enterprise needs effectively to use the counter rules and not only the rules. We continue to see how this works. Let us consider the rule that is experience, or the facts, or experimental results, which measure the success of our theories, that agreement between a theory and the data favors the theory. That's the main idea of the success of our theory, right? It means that there is an agreement between a theory and the data. What kind of data? The kind of data that is favoring the theory, that is being used to approve our theory, or in the best case, leaves the situation unchanged, which means there is no refutal, there is no the negation of our theory. Either it is approved, right, because the data are favoring it, or at least we don't have any change. So while disagreement endangers it, so you see that the agreement between theory and data favors the theory, but if there is a disagreement, it will endanger the theory, the suggestion that we did, and perhaps even forces us to eliminate it, which means that we have to withdraw our hypothesis or our theory. We should believe that it's not good, it doesn't work, and that's why we have to think about something else. If there is no agreement between data that we are using to analysis and the theory that we suggested, and don't forget that the theory here means hypothesis, essentially, which means itself the causal relationship between two phenomena, right? And one is considered as cause, the other one effect, and we believe that there is a causal relationship between them, right? And we suggest that, and then we go through the data treatment, data processing, and we analyze the results in order to see if this relationship, this causal relationship, is working or not. That's the idea. So now let's see if there is agreement. We said that the theory is approved. If there is no agreement between data and the theory is refused, right? Is negated, and then we have to rethink about what's going on and suggest a new theory. Now, we said that this rule is important part of all theories of confirmation and corroboration, right? That's the classic methodology of science, that we get an idea, we suggest a kind of relationship between them, we formulate everything as a theory, and then we go through the data in order to check, to verify our hypothesis. That's the main idea of the confirmation of a theory based on corroboration. Now, it's the essence of empiricism, right? Which means that is the essence of the experimental methodology. The counter rule corresponding to it advises us to introduce and elaborate hypotheses which are inconsistent with well-established theories and or well-established facts. So as soon as you want to change this classic formation of theories, and you want to suggest something different and new, so you have to think about what I can suggest that wouldn't be consistent, wouldn't be consistent with well-established theory or with well-established facts, what we considered up to now as obvious, right? So we should think in these different and contrary way in order to introduce the newness in what we are doing, right? To get a new result. So it advises us to proceed counter-inductively. So this is what is advising us. So, which means that if we want to go beyond the well-established theories, well-established model of explanation, right, we have to go counter-inductively. And then there would be the new horizons that will open, right? That's why it's very important to have this courage, intellectual courage, to say something different from what is believed by everyone, right? And a bit later, I will explain that how we already did that in the frame of our suggestion in the theory, in the philosophical theory of infinitism, how we counter-inductively suggested the idea of the existence of the infinite possibilities in the universe. Now, let's keep going. The counter-inductive procedure gives rise to the following question. Look at the kind of questions that we can have when we go effectively in the counter-inductive way. First, is counter-induction more reasonable than induction? You see? So apparently no, but what can confirm it? What can make us believe that the counter-induction is not more reasonable than induction? As long as you start to think with an open-minded, which means that you didn't believe previously and by kind of prejudgment that in the fact that the induction is the best one and the counter-induction it cannot be really reasonable, for example. No, that's the question. What can say that, right? So that's why the first question is contradiction more reasonable than induction? Well, we can add, is contradiction less reasonable than induction? The second question, are there circumstances favoring its use, favoring the use of counter-induction? Can we find a specific situation in which there would be a preference for counter-induction? That's another question, right? So what are the arguments for it? If yes, how we can argument that? How we can defend that? How we can support that? What are the arguments against it? What could effectively weaken, right, the idea of the counter induction. What can embolden and empower the induction against counter induction? So that's why the last question is the following. Is perhaps induction always preferable to counter induction? Really? Always? You know, that's where we start to doubt about it. And so on. So, you see that the idea of going against the well-established model of thought, the model of explanation, right, could be dangerous, could be risky. Why? Because usually for these well-established model or fact or theories, there are the support. And when I am talking about the support, we should say supports, right? We are talking about the theoretical support and also institutional one, which means that there are the people, the scientific, the professor, the famous names, who are supporting, who are emphasizing on the establishment, explanation of some models, some facts. They support that. They use that. They defend that. And anything you want to say against it could be a kind of coup. It's like a coup d'etat. It's like you want to upside down the established situation of these people, these institutions, these universities, or so on. Why? Because they are running their business thanks to these well-established theories. They are using that as a kind of fund of business, is a kind of capital for them. And they don't want to lose that. They don't want to, see their theories disapproved, shaped by a counter-induction or by counter-inductively elaborated theories. So that's why they don't let you do that. If you are, for example, a student of MBA or PhD and you want to go through your thesis, the memories, and you want to suggest something completely against these well-established theories, they won't approve you. You cannot be graduated. If you want to have the grade, you have to obey, you have to comply with what they are suggesting as truth, what they call truth, well-established fact, well-established theories. And you should dare to, to do so. You should dare suggesting something new if you want to make progress to science. And this is somehow what we did in the frame of infinitism. If you go through the book Infinitism, either in the English version of the book or in the Persian one, which is a more explicit and more elaborated version of this, and I hope that I can translate it or make a developed version of the English one, you will see that there would be a lot of ideas that are completely, counter-inductive, right? Which means the ideas that are shaking and putting in question these well-established theories. Why? I will find an opportunity in these presentations one day to explain that. But for now, we want to know that if you want to have any real progress for the humanity and for the science, you should there effectively use the counter-induction and assume the consequences and accept the risks, right? But we should do this. So let's continue. These questions will be answered in 2 steps. All these questions that we put. I shall first examine, this is Dr. Feyerabend who is talking. I shall first examine the counter rule that urges us to develop hypotheses inconsistent with accepted and highly confirmed theories. That's the first thing he wants to show us, he wants to demonstrate. Later on, I shall examine the counter rule that urges us to develop hypotheses inconsistent with well-established facts. The results may be summarized as follows. So it's a question of 2 steps. In the first one, he wants to demonstrate how we can suggest the hypotheses that are not anymore consistent with the accepted and confirmed theories. And in the second part, how we can suggest the hypotheses that are not consistent with the well-established facts. What we say facts, which means something that we didn't intervene in, we didn't interfere, and they are as they are. So how the result could be summarized. In the first case is here, right? The hypothesis inconsistent with the accepted theories. In the first case, it emerged that the evidence that might refute a theory can often be unearthed only with the help of an incompatible alternative. Incompatible. You see how consistent is the idea of inconsistent and incompatible. So what does it mean? The advice, which goes back to Newton and which is still very popular today, the advice to use alternatives only when refutations have already discredited the orthodox theory puts the cart before the horse, which means that usually we are recommended, we are advised that don't put in question any well-established theory if you don't see that there is a trend, to refute this theory, to put in question the credibility of this theory. As long as you don't see a trend, you don't see that everybody is doing that, don't do that. This is an advice. But he's saying us that this advice is like putting the cart before the horse. It doesn't work. We need something with a real dynamism, right? And that's why we need some other advice, some wiser advice. Also, some of the most important formal properties of a theory are found by contrast and not by analysis. This is the second recommendation. You see that if you want to catch the most important formal properties of a theory, you cannot really go through that by the analysis, because when you are analyzing, you are just using the same components, right? The components of the theory. So you are using that in a different, for example, configuration in order to see what are the formal properties of a theory. But Professor Feyerabend is suggesting us to do something else. What is this? Is contrasting, finding the different point, different views, different angles, different vanguard, right? So that's why he said a scientist who wishes to maximize the empirical content of the views he holds and who wants to understand them as clearly as he possibly can must, therefore introduce other views, right? So, which means that if you want to have a clear idea about what you are empirically advance, empirically put forward, the best way would be effectively to introduce other views, other understandings of the situation. If you are conservative, you don't do that. And that's why you cannot really maximize your empirical content, right? But if you want to do that, don't be afraid to introduce the different and alternative views. That is, what does it mean? It means this: he must adopt a pluralistic methodology. Pluralistic methodology. That's a very interesting point. I would like to stop for a moment on in this point. Why? Because this idea of pluralistic methodology is something that we have already suggested about the Infinitylogy and its methodology, right? And you remember one of the points that we retain from the introduction and also the chapter 1 was effectively this idea of mythologies, right? You see, in the first points, one of the first points that we got, right, we retained from the lecture of the introduction of the book is this one. You see here, we should rather thinking about mythologies instead of a methodology, right? So you see that we are more or less consistent in what we are doing, but because the objective of our work and the lecture of this book is to see what we can use for constructing the methodological framework of the Infinitylogy. And one of the ideas is that don't think about one single methodology. Think about several ones. Think about combining them, right? And going through of the connection and interconnection between the different kinds of methodology, different methodological approaches in order to create your own methodology. And that's interesting. That's highly interesting for what we want to do, because later you will see that when a discipline wants to work on the most complex thing that we can imagine, which is the infinity, you cannot really restrain yourself in one single methodology. So that's why the idea of the pluralistic methodology is very interesting. So we keep going. He must compare the scientific. The scientific must compare ideas with other ideas rather than with experience, and he must try to improve rather than discard the views that have failed in the competition. You see how tolerable is the suggestion of Feyerabend when we are working on some ideas to see if they are, good, valuable, or not. He said that when you get some idea about the subject of your work, don't try to discard them, right? What you have to do, when they are failed. What you have to do is to take these failed ideas and try to improve that. You see how constructive, how positive is his attitude regarding some ideas that could be refuted when it comes to the experience, to the empirical measurement, to the empirical verification of some ideas. So he said that even if you do so and these ideas are refuted or failed in the competition with some other idea, for example, with the well-established ideas, don't be afraid. Don't judge immediately, hatively, but on the contrary, try to see how you can improve that, how you can make these failed ideas evolve and go with that, you know. And then you will see that the approach could be completely different, and the outcome of this approach could be also very different. So, proceeding in this way, he will retain the theories of man and cosmos that are found in Genesis or in Pimander. So these are the very old texts regarding the creation of the universe, right? We know that scientifically they are not valuable, they are not serious, right? But what Dr. Feyerabend is suggesting us, he said that even this kind of idea regarding the creation of cosmos, universe, world, man, and so on, you should retain them. You shouldn't, reject them immediately, right? Why? Because he will elaborate them and use them to measure the success of evolution and other modern views. You see that this approach, this attitude is very beneficial even for what you are doing. If you believe in the theory of evolution and the modern interpretation of the creation, right? For example, if you believe in the Big Bang theories regarding the creation of the universe, what you can have as the result and outcome of the study of the idea of the Genesis or the Pimander is just, it helps you to see how successful your own theory, your theory of evolution, your theory of Big Bang is with regard to other, for example, historical religious interpretation or suggestion. So we don't lose anything, right? We are anyway the winner of this approach. So he may then discover that the theory of evolution is not as good as is generally assumed, and that it must be supplemented or entirely replaced by an improved version of Genesis. And that's hypothetical, that's just imaginary. But when you think in this way, you are really helping the science. When you have this attitude can help you to help the science, the scientific progress. Why? Because you can always get as the upshot of this kind of process, of this kind of attitude, something better, right? Something that is much better than what you already had. So that's why we should be attentive about what we want to do with the interpretation or with the theories that are different from ours, right? And from that moment, we can get a lot of advantage. Now, knowledge, so conceived in this way, is not a series of self-consistent theories that converge towards an ideal view, right? That's it's not a scientific attitude. If someone is trying to do so, which means to building a series of self-consistent theories for getting an ideal view, it's not really scientific. It's not really dynamic. It's not a dynamic approach of knowledge. It is not a gradual approach to the truth, right? Which means that you are artificially paralyzes yourself, your work. You are depriving your work from a theoretical dynamism, methodological dynamism, and therefore you will get something deficient. Why? Because you are trying artificially, to use what we call today the cancel culture. You cancel everything that is not compatible with what you are doing or what you are believing in. And that's not good. That's not good at all. It's not scientific. It's not helping the history of science. It's not helping the society. So we should have this open-mindedness and trying to, go through different approaches, different views, different theories, and give an opportunity, give a chance to any ideas, any theory, to see if it is not even approved, how it can be improved in order to help us, in order to take advantage of that. Now, it is rather an ever-increasing ocean of mutually incompatible alternatives. We should see the field of research, field of study as an ever-increasing, which means infinitely growing ocean of mutually incompatible alternatives. Which means there is a very delicate and subtle point in this proposal, which is that from the beginning until the end, and there is no end, it's an ongoing process, but at any given point, from the beginning to any given point, you should know that there wouldn't be the dominance of one single theory. Which means always and always, when you are giving the priority to a theory, try to keep in your mind that there would be the alternative theories. And these ever-increasing ocean of mutually incompatible alternatives. What is interesting is that you voluntarily, deliberately, you keep in your work the presence of the theories that are not completely compatible with your main theory, with your core theory, with your well-established theory, but you know that, and you do it consciously, you do it purposely, right? Purposefully, in order to enrich your work, improve what you will get as result. Why? Look at here. Because each single theory, each fairy tale, each myth that is part of the collection forcing the others into greater greater, you see, articulation, and all of them contributing via this process of competition through the development of our consciousness. You see how beneficial it is? You see how advantageous it is? How constructive it is? How interesting is this process? They are every single component that we can make intervene in our work will somehow help us, somehow be as a positive element of our work. Every idea, every theory, right, could contribute in the enrichment of our research, and then could develop more and more our consciousness. So when we know that it's so beneficial, so good for what we are doing as research, why don't do that? Why we shouldn't do that? That's the question, Why should be, reticent regarding this kind of suggestion? Now, nothing is ever settled. No view can ever be omitted from a comprehensive account. So if you don't want to have a comprehensive account, if you don't have a well-covered understanding of the issue, all right, you can omit everything you want, right? But if you want to get this comprehensive account, you should not try to omit, to put aside artificially something from your work, from your theory. So that's why he is giving us some concrete cases. Plutarch or Diogenes Laertius, and not Dirac or Van Nomen. These are the names of the historians, are the models for presenting a knowledge of this kind in which the history of a science becomes an inseparable part of the science itself. So there is no more this artificial separation of we have something with a very good established and well-framed content that we call science, and then we have a account of that. We have a history of that with a lot of ups and downs, stories, history, tales, fairy tales, and so on. This is the history of science, and then we have the science itself. No, it doesn't work like that. In this approach, in this vision, both of them are intricated, intertwined, joined, in order to present what we consider as science. Which means each discovery that we are using in our scientific activity right now has a history, right? And this history is going on with every data, with every formulas, for example, that we are using. And you cannot separate it. You cannot isolate the history of science from the science itself. That's a very interesting idea. It's interesting for one reason that I can develop based on the experience of what I am doing for the construction of the Infinitylogy. If one day the Infinitylogy is established as a discipline, I don't say science, but a discipline or something that is, because we defined the Infinitylogy as a multidisciplinary field of study. You said that philosophy, science, and technology come and they collaborate they go in a complementary, mutually complementary process, and then we produce more and more knowledge and ability to know the infinitude and also to use the infinitude that we have in the fabric of matter, right? So if one day I want to explain how I got these ideas and how I developed them, I cannot say that there is a pure formula for infinitology, and there is also some history about that. One of the reasons for which I wanted to record this work on this book, because I could easily go over this book and take some points from that and use in my work. Why I wanted to record that, why I wanted to do it in front of camera, the reason is that you can see as an example, right? Once I am not anymore there, you can see how someone with this idea was trying, to find some points here, some other ideas there, some suggestion over, I don't know, another book or another videos, for example, and then try to, put all these alternative suggestions, contradictions, and so on, and then get something called mythological framework of infinitology. Or at the end of the story, the infinitology itself. That's a good example of what Professor Feyerabend is suggesting here and what we are doing in these set of presentations, and we can be sure that in a lot of cases that would be the same thing. It's not because we cannot see what a scientific is going through in his room, in his laboratory or somewhere, that we should say that there is a history of quantum physics and there is a quantum physics. No, they are, interrelated. They are joined somehow in order to present one single product, which is the quantum physics. And the quantum physics is a theory and also is a history. Now, so he said it's essential for its further development as well as for giving content to the theories it contains at any particular moment. He is talking about the impossibility of separating, science and history of science, right? And he said that if we don't do that, we don't separate it, it would be useful for the further development as well as for giving content, substance to the theories it contains at any particular moment. At any particular moment means at any particular moment of its history, right? Its evolution. At any given stage of this path, any given step of this way. So, experts and laymen, professionals and dilettanti, truth freaks and liars, they are all invited. You see the positive and the negative figures, right? The positive and negative characters of the history of science, right? They are all invited to participate in the contest and to make their contribution, good or bad, little or a lot, to the enrichment of our culture. You see? And don't forget that when Feyerabend is suggesting it, he is not telling us that we should take the wrong ideas or the manipulation of this or that con artist in the construction of science directly. But it says that if you want to evolve this science, if you want to make the improvement of this science, you need all of this. So that's why he is talking about, look, he is not talking about the enrichment of the science, but the enrichment of the culture. And we know that the science is a part of the culture. So if you want to have an enriched science, developed science, improved science, you have to enrich your culture in general, right? And the science as a specific part of this culture. But there is some precaution. Look, the task of the sciences, however, is no longer to search for the truth, because we don't have such a thing. It doesn't mean anything in this approach when it comes to the epistemological anarchism. There is no truth in the absolute meaning of the term, or to praise God, or to systematize observation, or to improve prediction. Look, these are the terms that are very familiar to us when it comes to a scientific method, right? Systematizing observation, improving predictions, and when we are talking about praising God, for example, or searching for the truth, these are, you see, here it's a question of a philosophical approach, a philosophical undertaking. Here it's a question of a religious deed, right? A religious activity. And here we have two cases of the scientific action. All of these are not really interesting in this approach of getting everything into the as contributor of enrichment of our culture, right? So that's why he said that the scientist is no longer to search for that or to do all of this. But these are side effects of an activity to which his attention, the attention of the scientific, is now mainly directed, and which is here, to make the weaker case the stronger. That's the sophist approach. That said that don't try to destroy the weaker. Don't oppress the weaker. Help him to get stronger. That's the humanist approach of the sophist that we can use also in the science, and we can get a lot of intellectual and cultural benefits from this approach, from this attitude, from this activity, concretely. And thereby to sustain the motion of the whole, the motion, the dynamism, right? The movement, the enrichment, dynamic approach of the whole. Of the whole includes what? Includes science, philosophy, culture, ethics, everything is enriching thanks to this attitude that when we are facing the weaker, we don't erase that. We don't crash that. We help it. We take its hand and try to take it up, right? To help him to grow, to become better, right? To become stronger. And then we get what? We get a better enrichment of science, culture, and so on. So, as conclusion, I would like to say, we will go through this text in the next presentation, but just as a general conclusion, you see how when we have been told that if you want to be scientific, if you want to work scientifically, you should put aside your feelings, right? You should, remove the emotions from your work. That's all of this is nonsense. And we see that thanks to what Professor Feyerabend is suggesting us is exactly on the contrary. We have to introduce a part of the humanity, a part of our human existence into the science and the scientific work. And if we do so, we will get a better idea. We will get a better acquaintance of the universe. We will get a better knowledge of everything: man, society, nature, world, universe, existence, matter. So that's why that's a good idea. That's a good direction for the Infinitylogy, in elaborating its multidisciplinary methodology to take into consideration all of this, right? So, which means that if we want to have a kind of variable methodology, we should be open to different suggestions, different ideas, different theories, and not to be afraid about using the different parts, even though by habits, and by the cliches, we think that this is no longer valid. The idea of the creation of the world based on the Genesis, for example, is not a good idea. We can put it aside. We can, put it in the trash can of the history. And then we can act scientifically. It doesn't mean anything, right? So that's why we should try to see how, for what we want to do as the Infinitylogy and construction of its mythology or mythologies, we can use this idea of introducing the flexibility, the tolerance. This is what I call the methodological tolerance, right? The methodological, open-minded approach. So why not? We should think seriously about that. Thank you very much for watching this video, and we will go through this chapter 2 of this book in the next presentation. Thank you and bye.